Hey, welcome back everyone to Castoon, the tastiest podcast around. It's just so tasty, and today we have a very special guest with us here today with over 250,000 subscribers, Mr. Renter. We'll be talking about growing around, and I also have Shadow. How are you today, Shadow?
I thought you said you weren't going to do the tastiest intro thing.
Well, I had an existential crisis in my head, and then I thought, well, this is kind of, I didn't want to start this off bleak, but I had the thought in my head that if I mess it up, I'm going to keep it in.
That's fair. I'm doing well. Thank you for asking.
How are you today, John?
I am doing very well.
Today, we're going to be talking, like I said before, about growing around. I have lots of questions, gathered a lot of questions, and I'm going to be asking them. So first, let's just kind of set the mood for this.
Okay.
In your own words, can you explain just the overall concept summary of growing around?
Growing around, it takes place in a world where kids make all the rules. They run the societies, the towns, the houses, and the entire world is basically built from that idea.
So I remember, you made a video 3 years ago. I believe it was your first face cam video. And that was the first time I saw you mention growing around on your main channel. You may have mentioned it earlier on DeviantArt. And I remember this because you mentioned that at the time you wanted it to go to TV. So what made you switch over to your YouTube channel?
I've grown more and more disillusioned with networks as time goes on. All news coming from the actual corporate animation is more and more depressing, I must say.
Yeah, I also remember in your BoJack Horseman review, behind the review video, you endorse independence a lot. You say that it's hard, but it's worth it, to be free from any corporate meddling,
right,
so to speak.
I mean, sometimes corporations and executives, they do make important changes that need to happen, but
based off of what you said earlier, I was wondering if you were also referring to what's been happening to Nick recently with the president? News like that?
Yeah, that's another, not a drop in the bucket, but it's the cherry on top of the sundae as time has been going on.
So yeah, that was the first time I saw you mention it, unless there was a time earlier.
I probably mentioned growing around here or there. I don't know when the first time I've ever mentioned it really was.
What made you start becoming serious with making it like a tangible project and not just an idea?
When?
When?
The definitive date is in August of 2014. A lot of people noticed that it came after I reviewed Shorty McShort Shorts, which was a series of pilots that never really got picked up. It was similar to What a Cartoon Show. One of them basically had the idea of adults and kids reversed. However, the adults acted exactly like kids, and the kids acted exactly like kids, and it was just a boring and cliche story. And it felt like it was just being told with an animation error. They didn't utilize the premise at all. I mean, I've had the idea of a world where kids rule before this. I think a lot of people have had a similar idea at some point growing up. But seeing that show, that pilot, tackle the premise so poorly, made me decide to try and tackle it with the possibilities and the respect that it warranted.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned it. I was actually going to ask that a little later. Because you mentioned that that's a big thing that comes up when you talk about growing around. The fact that in that specific review, you mentioned that you were interested in the concept. You didn't really like the execution, but you liked the idea. So can you explain how legally that can work?
Legally it's fine. You can't copyright ideas. That short wasn't the only thing that ever used the idea of kids ruling the world. There's the 2009 movie Opposite Day. There are plenty of television shows, like Fairly Odd Parents had an episode where this happens. You just can't use their setting, their characters, any sort of specific things like that. You can't use any named things. But the overall premise, yeah, you can use it.
So, as far as concept-wise, would you say that Flip-Flop and Growing Around have significant differences, or where does that lie?
Oh, yeah, they're nothing alike at this point. They are completely different. looking at them both, you would not be able to confuse them for each other.
So what other mediums did you run this growing around topic through? Because I remember you made a book.
Yes, I made a novel. It was at a time when I didn't think it would be feasible or possible to turn it into an animation. But I've gathered together more of a crew, and I have a better idea of what I'm trying to do, and I think it's more possible to at least get it into a visual medium.
Now, as far as this crew goes, because I know that on different social medias, it kind of varies as far as how much activity you have. I'm assuming a lot of this grew around DeviantArt?
Yes.
So as far as your crew goes, like how, because I know that you initially had the idea, so can you explain, like, over the past 4 years, how did you sort of gather a crew? Was it all at once? Was it little by little?
At first, I tried to hire everybody at once, which was a major mistake at the time, because in a production like animation, not everyone is going to have a point at the same time. Like, don't hire voice actors from the start, for instance, because they're going to be waiting for a very, very long time.
Now, also, I remember in the vlog from 3 years ago that you mentioned that you were working on things like storyboards and stuff like that. Now, I'm interested. I don't believe I've seen it in the initial IndieGoGo trailer or in the Your Questions Answered. So, is it because stuff like that is outdated, or did it never come to be?
That stuff is very outdated. Like, we did initial storyboards because, like I said, I wanted to get everybody involved at once and wanted to get as many steps going as possible. And the storyboards that we initially made were for a very, very outdated version of the pilot.
Now, I am curious, and this is like just a question for you personally.
Okay.
What did you expect the reaction to be announcing that you were putting out an IndieGoGo campaign?
Honestly, I had no idea what to expect.
Because, you know, like as an you're an animation reviewer, you mentioned that
Right.
well throughout the biography and overview of it. And this would be a first, you know, a YouTuber who has reviewed animation, and that's sort of how they've gained an audience, transitioning into, you know, trying to make a pilot, trying to also make animation aside from just reviewing it. So I actually found that interesting.
Yeah.
So, what was your initial inspiration, or even more recent inspiration? Because that's also something I saw a lot of people asking, but I don't believe you answered it.
For the show overall?
As far as writing goes, because I know that for you, you're more of the writer / creator.
I've used plenty of inspirations. You gotta take a little bit from everywhere if you really want to create something true and unique. But the series is inspired from everything from songs to other cartoons, to books, to movies.
Now, you mentioned that you publish a book. Now, this question could be made. This question could be answered two ways. So, both in canon and also as far as your project goes, where does the book lie in all of this?
The book is essentially an alternate universe at this point. It's more prototypical versions of the characters. The main characters, the Dunn family, they had different first names, for instance. There were some of the ideas of the world that weren't fully realized. The family didn't even have a pet in the book.
So will you be making future books? So where does that go?
If I wanted to go back into the world of literature with this, I would either A, have to rewrite the first book and make it a little bit different, or B, I would just go with graphic novels.
Alright, so I see a big theme in this is like the fact that you switched a lot of things over. Possibly, like, I don't know, but I do know that over the 4 years you have most likely changed a lot of things. So if you can just explain it to the audience, what are some of the main things that were switched or altered?
Like, a lot is the most obvious answer, but the world entirely looked a lot more like the real world, the world that you go to every single day. We slowly changed that to what it looks like now, with kids building it from the ground up, instead of just kids inexplicably in charge.
You have mentioned, I believe it was in the trailer, that you're gonna have a Patreon tied specifically to growing around.
Yeah.
But you also already have a Patreon, so are you gonna have two? How is that gonna work?
Yeah, I would have to.
Alright, so you'll have two.
Right, one for people who want to support me and one for people who want to support the show.
Now, has any of the Patreon or book sales go into Growing Around as the pilot? As far as the pilot
Yeah,
goes.
they have, although the book hasn't been very profitable. It's basically paid for itself, but hasn't gone far beyond that.
Because I know that a big sort of I guess gripe is that a lot of people have noted that there hasn't been any specific animated parts of Growing Around, and I saw in your video you explained that it's because animation not only takes a lot of time, but it's also quite expensive. So with that, and this is just me sort of trying to meet the middle of that, would it have been possible to possibly create a very, very short snippet of the concept? Not the pilot, I mean just like a short snippet of something to show people, like under a minute or something.
It might have been possible, but even a minute of animation is still expensive. Like, television quality animation is about $10,000 per minute. Internet quality animation, stuff you'd see with like Eddsworld, it costs about $3,000 a minute. So no matter what, it's expensive.
So I also saw that you put out your scripts. You put out a lot of final drafts for scripts, I should probably say.
Yes.
What made you release the scripts early for Growing Around? And by early, I mean, I think all or most of the first season? And a little bit of the second season?
Most of the first season. I haven't written all 26 episodes. I think I've written about 20 of them for this first season. It's just the kind of stuff I do. I don't like to... I'm always excited to talk about my worlds and my works and stuff, and I wanted to do it as quickly as possible. If people are too afraid of spoilers or anything, they could easily avoid it.
And I also remember when I watched your We Need to Talk video, you mentioned that a lot of people seem to... criticize your first drafts of Growing Around. So could you grow on that topic a little bit?
Yeah.
Was when you were showing people some of the first concepts you had of Growing Around, what was the initial reaction towards that?
I don't even remember some of the initial reaction.
Was it initially something that people were worried that you would move away from your YouTube channel for? Because that was also a big concern for many people.
I don't think that was a concern yet, because I didn't think people thought at the time that I'd be taking it as seriously as I ended up taking it.
So you have, I saw that you have confirmed that you will, and this is just for people who are listening, you will not you're not going to take any breaks from reviewing animation. Animated atrocities and admirable animations will be a thing. Still,
right, they will be a thing.
While you work on this.
Yeah, they will definitely be a thing.
What has been the biggest non-financial hurdle? Because you said the biggest hurdle was just gathering the money for it. So, non-financial hurdle.
The biggest non-financial hurdle is basically learning to be in charge on the job. You have to talk to a bunch of people in a bunch of different mediums, and you have to sort of understand those mediums. Even if you're not able to draw, you need to technically be able to explain what the artists are doing wrong. Same with the sound people and the editing and all of that.
Could you also explain who's working on this with you?
Right now, I have 3 artists, actually. Two of them have been in my streams with me. Rebecca and Ava. One of them, Kamink, I think is more shy. She isn't in the conversations. And we also have a composer, Dr. C.
I also saw on Twitter that Tom Scott, a creator of things like the Asdef movie, he also has animated a lot of things. He also contacted you, or at least commented on Growing Around. Did you both talk one-on-one, or was it just that tweet?
We talked one-on-one. Yeah.
I'm gonna put it on the screen for everyone to read. Do you remember a lot of what he said? Do you need me to read it out loud?
Yeah, I have the message. I have the message here right now. I'm looking at it right now.
What would be your response to what he said? Because I remember on the live stream you said that you were taking all criticisms very seriously.
Right.
Well, valid ones anyway.
Yeah. I really do like his advice, and he seems like the person I'd most trust to follow the advice. After all, he has done a crowdfunding campaign for an animated series. If there's someone you trust on this topic, it would definitely be him.
Will you create separate social media accounts for Growing Around?
Like Twitter for one of the characters or something like that?
Oh, not specifically for the characters, but like instead of stuff on Growing Around just being put through you, possibly just growing around Twitter itself?
I don't think so. Maybe it would get its own YouTube channel eventually.
How will marketing growing around go?
I don't know how necessary that would be.
Let's actually go back to the concept of the show, the pilot. Kind of have a lot more questions revolving around that. Why did you decide on 22 minutes for the actual pilot opposed to 11 minutes or even shorter?
Because it allows me to, with the time limit, it allows me to really get into certain issues and the nuances in them. Plus, it is a personal weakness of mine. I have a hard time writing things short. Like, we definitely tried for an 11 or a 7 or even shorter minute pilot, but I had a hard time creating an entire coherent story in that amount of time.
When Growing Around gets off the ground, are you going to be the sole writer?
So far, it looks like that. I mean, I've written 2/3 at least of the first season.
Because I do feel like the 22 minutes went into why the Growing Around's... the IndieGoGo's goal is so high.
Yes.
Like, for example, if it was 11 minutes, maybe it wouldn't necessarily be $350,000.
Right. The animation budget, most of the budget would probably be halved, with the exception of things like perks.
Now, this is something that, it's not just your Kickstarter, it's the other popular Kickstarter I've seen. Do you pick the month? Do you pick the duration of how long it's up?
Kickstarter automatically has a month. IndieGoGo allows you to go up to 60 days. Most people will give you advice say, don't drag it out for longer than a month. Because
that was one of my biggest concerns, the fact that you set like a really high monetary goal with such a really, like a month, when it had been like 30 days.
Right.
So, and it's also fixed. So...
Yes, it is fixed.
So what made you choose 30 days? Because you said, because if you were to do the math on it, it would be an incredible amount of money per day just to get to that goal.
Well...
Did you consult other people who might have had experience on this?
Yeah, I've done plenty of research into the whole Kickstarter thing and the whole crowdfunding thing. Most pieces of advice say if you wouldn't have reached it in 30 days, you're not going to reach it in 60. The 30 days helps build up urgency to get people to donate quickly.
That's a really good point.
And
yeah, I get that.
And running a crowdfunding campaign is exhausting. If you drag it out for too long, you and your team will get very exhausted.
Yeah, and I remember you telling me that you're going to be doing a live stream every Sunday.
Yes.
As far as the campaign goes?
Yes.
Yeah, and I could imagine you're doing pretty much, 4 to 6 hours every week answering questions about Growing Around. I can understand that.
Yeah.
Now, as far as your crew goes, since we're on the topic of experience, does anyone else have any prior experience working not just in animation, but animation with a purpose to get it to a long-term, high-scale sort of project?
I don't know if they have been doing that in the past. I would assume not, or they would have probably told me about that.
Yes, because you hired. Okay, so you have mentioned multiple times about backup plans depending on how far you get.
Right.
So I'm just going to try to play sort of an example case.
Okay.
What if two questions, so we can make this as simple as possible. What is the backup plan if you're only like a few $100s away?
Oh, then we do this whole thing again. No reason not to. We'd probably add more higher tier perks. Because that seems to be something that we didn't think people would go for the 500 or 200 as much as they have been.
Versus if the backup plan received less than a quarter of the amount.
Less than a quarter of the amount? We're probably going to try and fund an animatic to show people what the animation can do, and then do another crowdfunding campaign to get that animated. Maybe not with television quality animation, but...
Now, I remember you talking about a lot about this. This is like a big focus I've personally taken away from the campaign. You have mentioned that you will be covering a lot of dark or deep issues, correct?
Yes.
So, with since you're going to be posting this on YouTube, what will happen if, for example, you get demonetized on that particular video?
We're not... like I said, with the way this is run, it's not really designed to be profitable. It's a passion project. It's not about the money. I don't really care too much if it gets demonetized.
Now, I know a lot of creative people, they generally don't necessarily enjoy when their stuff gets compared, and I completely understand. But one counter argument to that would be a comparison would help people understand a project more. And with this, you have mentioned that you understand why people would be a little confused. But is there... I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to describe all the cartoon, but is there one singular cartoon that has some aspects to it? Not like general animation stuff that every cartoon has, but like, you know, something very specific towards that cartoon. Is there any aspects of any cartoon that people have possibly seen that Growing Around has as well? Like, I've seen Kids Next Door get thrown around a lot.
Right. Another one that comes up a lot is Phineas and Ferb, with kids deciding to just take on these over-the-top adventures on a whim. The one that I use the most, though, is Recess, where kids build and maintain their own society.
Yeah, I've seen that. I've seen people compare it to like those shows, and with the whole and this is kind of another concern I had with the whole wacky and cartoonish sort of art direction, and then the concept of, you know, the added layer of handling deep dark issues. Do you think with both concepts it'll create sort of a dissonance? How will you and your team plan to like deal with stuff like that? Because you're essentially like the way that it looks. I wouldn't say it's like Happy Tree Friends in the sense of like it looks really cute and then like it's really, because like that doesn't necessarily, that's not the best analogy, but considering that it looks and every, like if you didn't tell me that it was going to handle deep and dark issues, I wouldn't have assumed that based off of looking at that. So do you think it would create sort of a dissonance?
Maybe, but maybe that dissonance could be helpful.
Could you explain?
It can help you be more invested in the characters, and these issues can resonate stronger when you're not expecting them, you know?
Yeah. I also looked at the pie chart for this, and I saw not only that animation was so high, but storyboarding is so low, and I actually had a few conversations with people. What made storyboarding so low as far as a percentage goes on the pie chart?
I based that number on the storyboarding I had done for the IndieGoGo pitch video.
Also, was outsourcing ever an option for you, or was that something you kind of rejected very early? As far as animation goes.
Yeah, that's probably something we weren't going to do.
Because one thing because I've had a lot of conversations with people about Growing Around, and I try to pride myself on being very fair towards both sides. And one of the things that people have mentioned was that, you know, it appears that you can probably get generally around the same sort of quality as generally the same project and get sort of, because I understand what it's like to make a passion project and want everything to look exactly how you think, with less money, and I saw that outsourcing was an option. So now obviously it's not my project, so I don't really have any final say, but why specifically did you not want to outsource, if you can answer that for everyone else?
I'd have to look up a lot more on the technical on how to do it, and it doesn't feel very moral to try and do something like that. Get the cheapest work possible.
Yeah, I get that, because like you said, it's you either get it fast, good, or cheap, and obviously you're going for good and fast, which means it's not going to be cheap.
Right.
Because you also mentioned that the pilot will take 9 months, correct? Or around that time?
Yes, that is the typical length of production of a cartoon episode.
Are you basing a lot of Growing Around based off of the typical sort of length of animation? Because,
yes,
you know, considering that a lot of the people on your team, or at least you, aren't necessarily, it would be fair to assume that you guys aren't as experienced. And I remember once, I forgot what video it was. I think it was your behind, or I guess it would be extra thoughts or further thoughts on, it was a Family Guy thing. Family Guy review. And I remember you mentioning that you shouldn't base everything off of statistics. So are you basing a lot of Growing Around and stuff like that on the typical and general and average?
No. Like, I've looked into specific examples.
Yeah, because I do see that you did put that within the video. You put
Right.
you put different pilots. I forgot the specific names for them.
Constant Pain was the specific one that I used.
And I also saw that you mentioned that a typical Family Guy episode takes a year. So,
Yes.
It's
a
just
typical Family
curious.
Guy episode takes a year and $2 million.
So, considering that the reason why many things in our world make sense, like minimum age requirements, age of consent, stuff like that, or because it is implied that age comes with experience, and with decent parenting, among many things, with children and growing around, because how I see it, they don't have as much experience as adults, how do you plan to get over that logical hurdle and make it make sense to people watching it?
A little bit of that has to be the buy-in. With any fantasy premise, there is a little bit of a buy-in. You can't just expect everything to behave exactly as it does in the real world with any fantasy series, really.
Yeah, because I do understand that growing around, it has this sort of... There's a lot of stuff you have to suspend your disbelief for. I'm sure you would agree.
Yeah, of course.
You also mentioned before that alcohol isn't going to be on Growing Around because of the fact that a lot of cartoons don't even mess with it, except Hey Arnold, that was your specific example.
Right.
And that was more of a figurative sense.
Right.
So in that case, considering that you'll be handling other things like war, like you said, for things like tag and stuff like that, in a figurative case, what makes alcohol and things of that nature a no-go? In a figurative sense.
Some things I feel more comfortable with dealing with, and some issues I feel I have more to say about.
Alright, no problem. So babies are not in charge yet, correct?
No, they're not in charge yet.
When do they become in charge, and is it tied to an event, like how a Sweet 16 happens and stuff like that?
About the age of 3, their birthday, I guess, is the closest.
Yeah, because I saw that essentially babies are not in charge yet, kids are, teens are, and they're kind of just seen as the older version of kids. Adults are not.
Right.
How do elders work, then?
That one we're still figuring out, and the reason we don't have an answer yet is because we really want to get an answer right as possible. Because when it comes to premises like this, no answer is infinitely better than a bad answer.
So this means that there are no elders in any of the final drafts of any script you put out so far.
There will be, but that's what the missing season 1 episodes are for. These little things that I haven't completely figured out yet.
So how does currency work? Because you mentioned that it's trading cards.
Yes.
So is it like just different? Is it trading cards in the sense of, because how trading cards work in real life is that there's various different ones of different value, but the way that currency works is that there's like just a few types, few set fixed types. So is it more of like the more valuable a random card is, it's just worth a lot?
Yes. Things like holofoil cards are worth a lot more than just standard cards.
All right. And how do marriages work? Because you mentioned that it works pretty much the same way, except that children are the ones that are essentially running the marriage and making sure everything is on the up and up. But what would be the purpose for adults to get married? Or is that just something not to look into deeply?
I would assume the kids would see it as just adult stuff, like how adults in the real world see childhood games as just kid stuff.
Now, it's actually funny you mentioned that, because in one of the conversations I had, someone mentioned that if you were to gift an adult, it'd be like a tax form or something. Would that make sense in Growing Around?
No, the adults aren't the ones who pay taxes.
So children would play... Okay, I got it. Because everything is switched. So then what would be a gift you'd give to an adult then?
Depends on their hobbies, I guess.
So representation is also a big thing that you mentioned, and the reason why representation and dark and deep topics are something that I kind of took away from it is because you don't really notice that with a lot of the big three, US anyway, animation networks. A lot of those cartoons don't necessarily cover things like that because of the sort of...
Right.
Because some people would be set back by it. So,
yeah.
You mentioned that one of the main characters will not be straight. I don't think you mentioned...
Yes. I mean, he's not a main character, but he's frequently seen in many episodes. He's an employee of Max, which is one of the main characters. His name's Nevin. And he is gay, yes.
Alright, so it was gay. So will there be asexual or aromantic people? Considering that, like, most kids, they don't really love romantically unless they do in growing around?
Yes, there will be an asexual character. It will be an adult character, though.
So, what made you want to handle deep and dark topics in animation? Is it because of the fact that there isn't a lot of that already?
It's more something that attracts me, you know? It seems interesting to write.
Will all of it essentially just be metaphorical and like an allegory sort of direction? You know, you won't necessarily say what it is, because the reason why cartoons that are going on a network don't say, you know, what they're talking about is because they have corporate censors. But considering that this is your YouTube channel, you can go as far as you personally want. So will it ever get to a point where it's blatant?
Right, I won't be using innuendo or metaphors at all. Like, if we're talking about something, we're really talking about it. In fact, the episode about death is gonna actually go into, like, how shielding things behind safety words and stuff like that makes it harder to actually deal with the issues.
Ah, so you will be talking about death.
Yes.
So I remember before you mentioned that death is a pretty heavy topic for a kid.
It is a heavy topic, which is why I'm still fine-tuning that script.
So now that we're on the topic, now I've seen this phrase get thrown around a lot, so I want you to personally confirm it.
Okay.
Did you mean BoJack for Kids, or did you not mean BoJack for Kids?
That was a joke. I mean, it's going to get pretty intense at some point, but it's not going to be constantly down.
Alright. Because, it's very interesting to see how this is going to turn out, because not only are you going to have the big boulder of trying to make everything make sense within the world that you've made, but you're also going to have the fact that you're going to be covering a lot of very complex issues, so I really do.
I think they go together more than people might expect.
Why would you say?
Because the kids have to deal with the adult issues. Their parents can't really shield them from these issues.
Now, you mentioned before, is there going to be any episode showing pretty much how kids, or I guess teens in this instance, would transition into adults and how their role in society would change?
Yeah, that's going to be integral to several characters' arcs. Like, the pilot is about Max turning 12, and he's very insecure about turning 13 next year. He's almost a teenager, and it's a part of his character arc.
Now, I do want to go back to representation before I go into the pilot, because there actually is some other questions I have about the pilot. Representation is another big part that I took away from that. However, you did mention that certain disabilities will not be portrayed through the show. Will we be seeing a kid, for example, in a wheelchair? Because that is also something that we don't see a lot in animation.
I don't think so, because medicine is one of those areas you kind of want to stay away from in a concept like this.
I believe you mentioned what that would be like. I forgot the specific term you used. Like how for cops it would be Boy and Girl Scouts.
Yes, the cops are Boy and Girl Scouts.
Like you mentioned that medicine in that case would kind of just be like a lollipop or something like that. I forgot specifically what.
No, I never came up with an answer. I've specifically denied talking about that particular subject.
Like many pilots, will the pilot for Growing Around have drastically different animation when it comes out compared to the series, the hypothetical series that you make? Or basically, if you were to receive the funds for it, are there visual things that'll be compromised until you reach a solid financial backing? Or are you just going to go all out on the pilot?
Like, the funds are for the pilot. That's what I'm spending the money on. I'm not going to...
So you will be going all out on the pilot, and then
yeah,
if the pilot does well, if the Patreon does well, then that's when the pilot turns into a series.
Yes.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Alright, I got that. Could you expand on the potential costs of it? Because I feel like that $350,000, I know it makes sense to you, it makes sense to me.
Right.
But could you explain it for people who are listening? Like, what made you get to $350,000, considering, and this is just one example of many, that, for example, the Butch Hartman Kickstarter, that's $250,000 for the first phase of his network.
Yeah.
So we're talking about an extra $100,000.
I mean, I don't think the Butch Hartman example is very good because, like, if you look at the comments on his videos, people are saying the 250 is not even enough for one episode of a show.
So you have been looking around on the Butch Hartman Kickstarter. Do you want to comment on it in any way? Because I know a lot of other people have. I know I made a video on it.
Like, to me, having gone through all of the research on how to properly run a crowdfunding campaign, it feels like he very much did rush into this. I mean, in his campaign and a video he made on Twitter, I think he talks a lot about how proud he is of this name, Oaxis. However, yes, like, it was copyrighted by an iPhone case company, and lo and behold, they even had a Kickstarter a couple of years ago. So if you search Oaxis Kickstarter, they're the first thing that comes up.
That's really sad. Because I get why he named it that way, Oasis and Axis, even though I don't understand the Axis part, but...
I mean, I don't think he's going to get, like, sued or anything because they don't have competing audiences. But if you're running a Kickstarter and crowdfunding campaign, this is the last thing that you want.
Yeah, especially, like, the fact that he is getting so much blowback on it. If he tries to do this again, he's just going to have the sort of... It's going to stink of what happened before. And all the miseducation or lack of, because we don't know,
right,
that he put into it. It honestly didn't feel like he... I feel like he put it out there knowing that he might have gotten a lot of money for it because of who he is, but not necessarily because of the project itself.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I understand that.
So going back to this Kickstarter, what made you go fixed costs instead of flexible?
Because if I get half the funds, I can't exactly use half the funds. You know, I want to deliver on what I ask for. Like, the worst thing possible is not getting your funds. The worst thing possible is getting your funds and not being able to deliver on what you promised.
Now, were there any perks that are being tossed around that you ultimately decided no one would truly want?
I don't think so.
Because the way that you put your perks and the way that Butch put his perks were just atmospheres apart. Like, he had, like, an hour of his time. You can be a character on the show, or both animated and acted. He had stuff like that.
Right.
So it was actually interesting to see how both of you kind of chose different routes. Like, yours is a little more based on the actual show. It's based on any tangible piece of merchandise or stuff like that.
Yeah.
So it was actually interesting to see that.
Perks were probably a challenge to come up with.
I do also notice that you'll be hand signing posters, and you did not put a cap on that. So
yeah.
So will it be, I guess the best way I can put it, is the poster that's on there, is that what we're getting? Is just going to be signed? Because that's a pretty busy poster. Is it just going to be signed on the sidewalk, as it looks like?
Yeah. Or I guess you could specify where you want it signed. I wouldn't mind doing that. Also,
now that I'm looking at the poster, what made you put the two arrows pointing in opposite directions for both the O and growing and around? Does that mean anything, or both of the icons just mentioning or just symbolizing the same thing?
It's kind of just, the growing around thing. It showcases reverse.
Yeah, I got you. And you also mentioned within the... I want to say it was the questions answered, but it could have been the trailer, that with working on growing around, it has given you a lot more empathy, would be the closest word, for doing projects like this. The fact that it's a miracle for stuff like this to even happen.
Right, and there are also always a lot of complications behind the set.
Could you expand on that? Because I felt like that was a really interesting point of the video.
I mean, I don't know exactly how I'd expand on that beyond what I said.
Like, was there, like, a clicking moment for you when you saw that, like, oh, yeah, this is actually a lot harder than I thought, and then you kind of connected that back to, like, other people, like, let's say, like, the Nickelodeon Animation Network, YouTube channel, how there's a lot of pilots there that never get off the ground. It was what made you put that specific point in your video, that you had empathy? Because that didn't necessarily have to do with growing around, per se.
I don't know, it's just something that's been growing over time as I do everything I need to do to get more qualified to do this, go through every little thing I need to do to learn what I need to do, and all the work to get everything fine-tuned. And, sometimes it's dealing with the same questions and complaints over and over again, even though you've grown past them, or you've decided to consider them a difference of opinion.
Now, this is just this is probably totally obvious to possibly more closer supporters, but the dad character, that's based off of you, isn't it?
No.
Like, appearance-wise.
No. That was
You
an
sure?
accident. I am absolutely sure. The original artist, Kyle, he based it on one of his own characters, I guess. I did not give him any specifications, and that's just what he came up with.
Yeah, because when I saw the beard and I saw the hair, I was like, this is like John's way of putting himself within growing around without... Because you said you didn't want to voice act, so that's kind of how I got to the conclusion.
I mean, the ironic thing is that Robert, the dad, is probably the character that I'm the least like of the main family.
I also saw that it's very close to Sally, and I do remember you saying that you enjoy writing female characters more than male.
Yes.
So with the main cast, which character sort of clicked the most, or clicked first? Which character was the concept behind them, their personality, and all of those, everything in that nature? Which was the first character to be like the easiest to conceptualize?
That would probably be Sally. That's why originally it was about the entire family, and in some ways it still is. But Sally kept taking a front seat, and she became more the main character.
Also, I'm seeing Beetle cars. How did that come to be? Is it just because of the fact that there's a type of car that's called a Beetle, so you just decided to, I guess personify would be a terrible word, but...
Creating a car was actually one of the biggest logical hurdles in creating the world of growing around, because we needed something with the specific shape that will allow kids to comfortably drive and adults to comfortably be in the back seat. And Bugs, or Beetles, was one of the few things that actually had that shape. And it came when somebody mentioned the car-type Beetles when I asked what kind of cars would the kids drive.
Oh, because, I remember, and actually you mentioned it, the Fairly Odd Parents thing, they actually did skateboards. They skateboarded everywhere, so it was actually interesting to see how it would develop for growing around. I also see a news team. Will that also be a big thing? Kind of like Chet You Betcha for Fairly Odd Parents? Is that a big part of growing around as well?
I wouldn't say it's a big part, but we do have a recurring news person character named Harper.
Now, I know a big gripe that you have with certain anime shows is comic reliefs, correct? Like, I remember that for Planet Sheen, Minions.
If they're done badly.
Yeah, if they're done badly. So, how have you approached that, if you have any comic relief characters on your show?
No one character is just a comic relief. Every character has moments of humor and moments of drama, even some of the more bubbly, over-the-top fun characters.
I also saw that you mentioned that the first season, second season, will mostly be episodic, and you'll get into arcs later on. Now, will you be showing those arcs in all of the main drafts or finished drafts on your wherever you post them, which I'm assuming was your website, correct?
Right, website or on DeviantArt.
Will you be showing the arcs? Because now you're getting to because how with Steven Universe, when it gets leaked, everyone is kind of annoyed by it. So,
I've already revealed what the season 2 arc is, but as for seasons 3, 4, 5, so on, I am keeping them to myself and only to a very close-knit community.
Yeah, I would assume so, because that would be kind of I guess heart would be a bad word, but that's kind of a big part of
right
certain shows going on. I know that Gravity Falls was another example of a show that kind of got progressively more and more complex as it went on, and I'm assuming Growing Around will be the same.
Yes. Season 1 is mostly episodic, just vignettes. Season 2 has a more ongoing narrative.
I noticed when you started Growing Around, you actually got a lot more active, a lot more social with a lot more people. I saw that you retweet a lot more fan art, So has growing around, in a sense, I know YouTube has, but has growing around sort of pushed you to be a lot more socially active?
Yes.
Like,
Yes, it has. I mean, the people that I've worked with have become some of my best friends that I've ever had.
because think about it, like this video you're doing right here, I don't believe you've collaborated with someone you did the Steam Hams video,
Yeah.
but like before that, I don't believe you've collabed with someone for years.
I think the last one was with Pie Guy in 2014. Wow.
Yeah, that's why it was incredibly. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't think you would have been interested in that because of the fact that collaborations aren't necessarily a common thing. But
Right.
like I said, it was truly interesting. I really wanted to see your side of it.
Yes.
I know Shadow made a video on it. You thank Shadow for it. I see that you're retweeting a lot of growing around art. You're answering a few questions about it. You're doing 6-hour streams on it. I know that the first stream you did on growing around, it was your first live stream. Were you nervous about that at all?
Oh, yeah, of course I was nervous.
And I also saw that with the second live stream, things have gotten... You've learned a little bit more as far as, like, how to approach it. You have like a screen of the person doing the art, as well as
Yeah.
anything that you show on the slideshow. You have more mods. You have it on slow mode. Yeah. So I can understand how growing around has... If you were to look at it from the social side of it, like the fact that you've been talking to a lot of people, I could imagine how it'd be like a very transitional period.
Yeah, definitely.
In regards to that, and I just want to, I personally think I knew the answer for this, but I'm just gonna ask anyway. The way that you sent an open invitation for anyone to talk about the campaign, will you also send an open invitation for people to review the pilot?
Of course, I'd be a major hypocrite if I said people couldn't review it.
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, like, would you actively go out of your way, the way that you did with the campaign and raising it?
Sure, I don't see why not. I mean, I'm proud of it. I don't think I have anything to fear.
Will you be commenting on anyone who does? It doesn't necessarily have to be a YouTube comment, but will you acknowledge when someone does? Or will any person on your team will?
I can't speak for my team, but maybe it kind of depends who they are, If it's somebody who I know personally, yeah, I would probably comment on that. But if it's like somebody who I've never even heard of that I don't know exists, that would be kind of difficult.
Because that's a big thing that I've personally looked at. The fact that, I mean, yeah, your name is the Mysterious Mr. Enter, but it doesn't come necessarily from just the name. It also comes from the fact that, a lot of people who also talk about animation, there isn't a lot of people that you necessarily have been on their channel, have been on your channel, you have talked to. So I really do appreciate you doing what you're doing here, because it kind of gives transparency. You're not just picking the people you're talking to for very specific answers the way that, for example, Butch would. I feel like Butch Hartman wouldn't necessarily talk to a YouTuber about Alaxis. He would talk in a very controlled circumstance.
Right.
So as far as the team goes, you mentioned the artist, you mentioned the art director, the composer, and you mentioned that for now, you will be the only person that will be writing it. You have been writing it. Will you also be putting out those scripts? Will you also be putting out said scripts that you're writing for seasons 2, 3, and beyond, also on DeviantArt, the way that you put it out for the initial growing around stuff?
I believe so.
And for the perks of, because I'm assuming that you'll be putting perks on the Patreon going around, will the perks of that be similar to the perks of this IndieGoGo?
Yeah, I think so.
Why should I trust that you know how to get to the goal product that you have when the money is there? Why should I trust that?
Because I'm staking my entire career on this. Like, if I get the money and I don't deliver, that's more or less career suicide for me.
And the other question was, how is this cartoon Kickstarter different from all the others before?
With these characters, I really want to see them grow and develop. You're going to see them become bigger and better people. They'll get older. They'll learn lessons. They will keep all of their experiences between episodes.
And I guess this is just a personal question for me. Has anyone else ever come to you about like talking about growing around personally, like a conversation that we're having right now?
I don't think one-on-one like this.
So with that being said, why did you accept this? Like, what was it about me or my channel that made you want to do this?
I like your work. I don't.
I know Shadow's sleeping over there.
Yeah, I like his work too. I don't know if it's more complex than that.
Well, so as far as anyone else in the community, there's been other people like Pie Guy, for example. I'm gonna use him only because he's publicly commented on it. If he were to approach you about this, would you also be interested in talking about it with him as well?
I don't see why not.
So if you guys have anything that you wanna ask, I'll make sure to relay it over, and I'll try to get you the best answer within my ability in the comments down below. I'll be putting all of the different parts of Growing Around's team in the comments below, and if you do want to support the IndieGoGo, please do. As much as it seems like it may or may not hit the goal, the main purpose of it, and Enter, feel free to jump in if I'm wrong, is to just see how much support that it can get.
Right.
Correct?
It's going to be very, very valuable determining what direction we want to go forward to see how much we do manage raising on IndieGoGo. Like, even if we don't hit our goal, how far we get is still very valuable information.
So yeah, make sure to, if you are interested in it, please, I'm going to be putting it in the description below. I'll be putting it in the pinned comment. Please make sure to support the IndieGoGo. And with all of that said, I'll talk to you guys next time.